So we're going to move on to Stephen Lacey, founder of The Outsiders. Stephen's particular specialism is in researching the mass mainstream, the often white British working class who are so often ignored in traditional research. He's done a huge body of work in this area, looking at issues such as the reasons the white working class voted for Brexit, for example. He has a wealth of experience in research among so-called hard-to-reach audiences and bringing marginalised voices to the table. He's been recognised with a Ginny Valentine Award. It seems to be a theme emerging here. A Ginny Valentine Award for the pursuit of minority voices. Stephen's presentation is called Forgotten Voices, the Mass Mainstream. So research shows that many marketeers, policymakers and strategists think that the UK thinks just like them. The voices of the mass mainstream are often ignored or dismissed. So Stephen will show why brands should and how they can connect to the mass mainstream. So Stephen, I can hear you there, so over to you.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. Great to be here. So I'm going to talk about the mass mainstream, and I'm going to talk about the white mass mainstream element of that. And this follows a lot of recent research I've been doing about this audience. We're following up with looking at the mass mainstream in terms of ethnic minorities, and we'll be doing that next year. But this is very, very focused on the white mass mainstream. So why are they here? Why have we got the white mass mainstream in a diversity conversation? I think it's an interesting question. I argue that they're the biggest diverse group, and I argue they're the biggest diverse group that we tend to ignore. For many years, it's an audience, I've been researching it for many years, it's an audience that's felt neglected, ignored, powerless, not respected, not listened to. No real heroes. I think the last kind of white working class music hero was probably Oasis. Little representation in position of power. I think there's twice as many lawyers in the House of Commons than there are blue collar workers. It's an audience that's often demonised, caricatured, stereotyped. And I think when you talk about prototypicality of this audience, what is it? What is the average? And I think for many people, it's drunks, it's the chavs, it's living on the housing estates, it's the beasts, it's the thick, the uneducated, the fools that voted for Brexit, the embarrassing side of Britain, the not progressive side. And we don't really think of the positives, the community, the family people, the builders, the traders, the hairdressers that keep this nation kind of going. People who seem to have got it and for the last few years, seem to be political strategists. So on the right, the Policy Exchange since 2015 has been looking at just managing kind of audience. And really that kind of the basis of the Conservative Party strategy. And on the left, Owen Jones has been championing this audience for a number of years. And you have Claire Ainsley, who's working for Sir Keir Starmer as a kind of head of kind of policy. But I think the commercial world's a little bit kind of behind. And I think the market research industry can be a little bit kind of behind on this audience. I asked a researcher yesterday, why is that? Why do you think the industry feels this way? And her viewpoint was the industry is repulsed by this audience. I think that's wrong. I think that's far too hard. But I think there's a fear. I think there's sometimes a contempt for this audience and sometimes a pity. They're not cool. So going to Morecambe and going into the pubs and doing ethnography is not the same as doing it in kind of Hoxton. But I think also their values are different. And today we're going to be showing how some of their kind of values are different to the kind of more kind of progressive kind of audiences. I think also they're very, very important. So why do they matter? So large numbers. So some people say it's 25%. Some people even taking it up. Vowels, I think, looked at mass market and took it up to 60%. I think it's more around 35 to 40% of the population. I've got to stop a situation get worse. So I do a lot of work around counter-extremism. And last month I was looking at kind of counter-extremism and the rise of the far right. And I'm starting to see it seeping more into the mainstream than I've ever seen before. If you don't listen, you'll be bitten. So I don't think many people saw Brexit coming. And I think if you'd been connected, you would have seen that. I think Trump in the US is another example of that. But they're probably your customers. So they're probably your customers of most of your brands. They're probably the people that consume your advertising and enjoy it. And they're probably your employees. And also they're the modern day Warwick kingmakers. So, but probably hopefully more successful in some ways. But The Economist talks about how they hold the keys to number 10. So for the next few years, they will determine who's in power in this country. So how are they feeling? Well, there's lots of fears. They don't like the concept that we're a divided nation. They don't like the Brexit and Remain on one side, Conservative kind of Labour, populist versus Liberals, that the country pulled it into a degree of kind of polarity. That doesn't feel very British. They much more want a kind of unity. They want a united kind of nation. We're a trading nation. We like to get on. We like the middle ground. Fearful of a second wave, which has kind of come back. Fearful of a collapsing economy because they're going to get hurt. They're going to be the people that are most kind of punished. They dislike fast social change, and that's going to become a common kind of theme. So they like evolution, not revolution. Revolution, fast change, they're on the cold front of. They get punished by. And they dislike rising prices. So companies have spent a lot of money on initiatives on COVID, saying how much we're your best friend and good social purpose and we're here for you. And then people are putting their prices up. And for this audience, that's a slap in the face. I remember someone saying, and they're spotting it. So I've got videos and reams of videos of them talking about it. Someone said, I go to Burger King, it's airport prices. How can they do that at a time of COVID when people are struggling? There's an increasing trust void. So they don't generally trust politicians. They don't trust media. They're dipping out more and more of media. Recently did a lot of work around kind of COVID, and I'm seeing them pull more and more out of kind of the media space, not reading newspapers, not consuming media. They feel that establishment is failing. And what I'm seeing is the rise of conspiracy theories in this. So I just did a presentation called Age of Rage, and out of 75 people, only 2 people believed that it had come from bats. The majority of people believed that it had come from a Chinese lab, a few people kind of 5G. Recently, I've been picking up more and more people talking about kind of Pizzagate, especially working class kind of females. So it's worrying. So there's false narratives coming into this kind of audience. Pre-COVID, present was tough and really difficult. So everything was expensive, credit was hard to get, you're constantly kind of on, can't afford to save. And the future looks awful as well. So people realize they couldn't get on the housing ladder, things are getting kind of tougher, their children probably won't get on the housing ladder. So the future looks awful, which I kind of talk about the death of dreams. So in many ways for this audience, kind of dreams are dying. So they don't think in 2 years I'm going to do this, 3 years I'm going to do this, and 4 years I'm going to do that, because the future looks horrific. And they're wrapped up in a present that's becoming more and more difficult. So because of that, they tend to look more back to the past. So as caveman, we're programmed as to seek out new foods, as caveman, we're programmed to seek out new things. And that's new food and new kind of waters. But those things can also kind of kill us. So this is an audience that tends to go more towards the familiar than the new. And as times get more difficult, that battle between the new and the familiar, they will tend more towards the familiar. And the past feels safety. Future's awful, present's really, really difficult. So they play back to nostalgia. And nostalgia makes them feel safe. Nostalgia's security. Nostalgia's the positive memories. And people say, what is that? In some ways, the Second World War kind of embodies that, the heroism of the Second World War. But I often say it's a Hovisad. It's a black and white Hovisad where everyone knows everyone and everyone kind of gets on. And that's so important when people are going, this audience is going through a difficult kind of time. I love this quote from Behavioural Change expert. He said that Britishness is such a secure anchor in their life because it's something you can't take away. So you can take away from these people their jobs, you can take away their houses, you can take away their voice to a point. But Britishness, that past, is something you can't take away. And that is why this audience got so upset about Black Lives Matter and their attacks on the statues, because those statues were more than just a statue. They were a representation of a past and a safety and a nostalgic element that made them feel safe in a difficult time. But there were other reasons why this audience generally disliked Black Lives Matter. They saw it very much as an American issue. They don't see the UK as being that racist. But one of the biggest things was they thought it was unfair. So they had been wound up by the Dominic Cummings story a couple of weeks before, and suddenly there was 40,000 people on the streets. And for them, that was unfair. They thought it was a strain on the NHS. They thought people should be obeying the lockdown. It felt like a revolution when the statue was being pulled down, which is too fast, and they felt that they would be suffering. They don't understand the concept of white privilege, because for many of this audience, they don't have privilege themselves, and they dislike the breakdown of law and order on both sides. So they're condemning the far right protests and Black Lives Matter on both sides of that, because they like law and order. They like that sense of kind of safety. And they also dislike the tension, because as I said, this is an audience that is looking more and more towards unity. They generally dislike political kind of correctness, and for them, political correctness is seen as a big kind of negative, and that can be exaggerated for reasons from the kind of Daily Mail and the Daily Express and the Sun, sometimes when it kind of does narratives, so kind of exaggerated narratives, but also it feels like it's someone telling them what to do and how to kind of think. It's another person telling them how to behave. And what you're seeing is what a form of kind of, for this audience, a form of liberal totalitarianism, where they feel that they can't actually have conversations in the public square. So I've recently been doing work around kind of social media and Facebook, and a lot of people are dipping out, even having conversations on Facebook. So their private face is becoming much more split from their public face. So there's some of the negative things. And I think on the positive, their community, family values, they like respect and fairness. But I've got a big question, and the big question is, what degree do you listen to and value this group's opinions? Because it's a big audience, and I think they deserve to be listened to and heard.
Even crackerjack, that was fantastic to leave the presentation posing a question to the audience here today. Look, I hope you don't feel I'm going to give you short shrift here, Stephen.
No.
10:15, so I think we'll go straight into the panel session.
Of course.
So what we're going to do here is each of the presenters is going to put their video on, so you'll see them on screen. This is unusual from an Aura presentation, but or a webinar rather, but 5 happy smiley faces in front of you now. And I'm going to hand over the reins to Ella Fryer-Smith for the panel discussion. Ella will read it. Ella is an independent qualitative research consultant. It's been working for many years, it's been vocal for many years about the lack of socioeconomic diversity in the industry. So who better to hand over to for this debate? Ella, you have the mic.
Thank you, Tom. Hi, everyone. So I think you can see that the poll question has should have come up for all of you onto your screen, and the idea is we wanted to track to see whether there was any movement on how you answered this. So I think Suzanne at some point when you've taken the next few seconds to answer that, she will come back to me with the results. But I can tell you the results for the first time we asked that question up front, and so 48% of you said you felt nervous about addressing these issues. However, 38% said you were confident and 15% empowered. So actually 53% of you were more on that side. So that's interesting. And we'll see if there's been a shift, as I say, in a few moments. However, first of all, thank you, all you speakers. I think that we covered a lot in that time, and it was a lot to take in, and I enjoyed all of your presentations. I tried to get sort of one question for all of us to discuss per presentation. So I think what I'll do is maybe just put those out there and see what we come up with. So the first one was, I think we'll start backwards actually. We'll start with Steve, since you were the last person we heard from, Steve. So I just wondered, you know, we talked a lot in some of the other presentations about targeting, particularly thinking of Theo's presentation here. You know, should we be thinking about explicitly targeting mass mainstream audiences in a way that perhaps we're not, then maybe that we're looking at sort of BAME audiences and breaking those down further? Should we be thinking about that? And that's for you, Steve, but also if anyone wants to chip in.
I mean, I think we should. I think we should be thinking of them. I think we should be looking at them and trying to understand them and get closer to them and start to break them down. Because even within the mass mainstream, myself and Conrad have done kind of a lot of work on this. There's broad spectrums, to those that are kind of in the middle, to those that are kind of on the kind of housing estate. So I think it's really, really important. But I also think that in research, we like difference. And I think sometimes it's good to look at what unites us as well. So I think looking at unification across the country, I think is important at this time, as well as kind of looking at difference.
Great. Anyone else have anything to add to
I'd agree with that. I think, you know, representation is important everywhere. So it's not just the minorities, it's not just the fringe, but of course the mainstream. We need to be looking at the broad picture always. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to that point, our starting point that Conrad kind of started us off with, that diversity equals difference in all its guises. So yeah, great. From Theo's presentation, I thought it was really fascinating that people assumed when Core started talking about representation that that was all about sample. And I wondered whether, and this goes to all of you, whether we think that's because that feels like maybe an easier problem to solve than looking at workforces. I don't know. Would love to hear any thoughts on that, and also particularly thinking of our audience here from Aura, you know, how clients maybe should be considering that, and any actions that they can think about taking.
No, I agree, actually. I think that the issue with how diverse our workforces are is structural. It's, you know, there's influences from outside of our industry, you know, the education system, social class. There's so many different factors that, you know, are playing into the situation as it is, that actually just solving the way that we actually conduct our research is far easier. And also I think that, you know, a lot of I think some called it a cottage industry. You know, a lot of the companies in our industry are very small. So, you know, if you've got 5 people in your organization, having one token ethnic person, it's not the be all and end all, but the amount of research that we conduct, that is vast. So it makes more sense that, you know, that's something that we would tackle. It was interesting that they immediately assumed we were talking about panel. I don't know, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I would add that it's actually not entirely helpful to focus on people, but really more of a diversity of thought. So I think I was mentioning, if you're doing focus groups, it's not just about having the perspective of someone who's of a specific ethnic group. If you just had someone else there to talk this through, and I think the more you start thinking differently like that, I would like to hope, and maybe this is me being too optimistic, the structural things that we can't really solve ourselves will start to resolve themselves, but we would still have implemented the practice of having real diversity of thought.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it's actually the intersectionality with the socioeconomic group that's really important there, because one of your point on workforce is really important, I think, Ella, because while the route into the market research industry is through a big agency's graduate trainee scheme, and have roughly 50% of the UK going to university and 50% of the UK not going to university, we will continue to have a lack of diversity of thought, because it doesn't matter. An Oxford graduate is largely an Oxford graduate, whatever the colour of their skin, or whatever their gender, right? There is a much bigger difference between, you know, somebody who isn't a graduate and somebody who is.
I'd agree with that, and we've just done a kind of quant survey looking at the kind of UK and the industry, the creative industry, including kind of market research, and the audience that we found was one of the lowest on indices is what you call a mass kind of traditional kind of audience. I think there's 10 million people, and they're most probably least likely to have a job, because they don't have the right language of kind of progressiveness for the kind of industry and the marketing community. They're probably not going to get onto the quota system, and they don't have the airs and graces of kind of middle classness.
Well, I think that's fascinating in terms of just reflecting overall, you know, thinking about recruitment both on the client side and the supplier side is important. And I'm just wondering about the kinds of quotas that we're looking for currently, and also maybe the barriers that exist in terms of, to quote Bourdieu in anthropology, you know, habitus and how we carry ourselves and how we talk and all of those things. So just something to consider for everyone on that. So just in terms of Etty's presentation, and this links, I think it was Ipek's question, and so I'm opening it to everyone because it's a complex and difficult question. I don't expect us to necessarily have answers, but the discussion should be interesting nonetheless. So, you know, how do we know what we don't know? Perhaps we're not questioning when we should be questioning. You know, how can we just all get more confident in this? And I'll open that to the floor.
I think it's really difficult, and in some ways you have to be willing to get it wrong as well. I think it's just a case of kind of stepping in the deep end with some of these issues and just trying to swim. I think it's a difficult question to answer because there is no one like easy solution for this. I think you have to start thinking differently. You have to get your team right, and you have to be really willing to step into somebody else's world, and that still might not give you the full answers of the things you know that you don't know, but it will get you at least halfway there.
Yeah, there's no way of knowing what you don't know. You know, you have to be curious. You know, I think I had a term for it, researching to learn rather than researching to confirm. You know, a lot of the time we're setting up these projects to try and validate what we already think. We need to steer away from that and try to set up these projects to find out what we don't know. And that's a mindset shift. Yeah.
I agree with that.
That's right. Sorry, go on, Steve.
No, I think openness is key. And actually, you know, some of the best briefs I work on and the best work I do is when I feel uncomfortable. Somewhere during that process. When I have that feeling of uncomfortableness, that's sometimes when I get the best kind of work.
Yeah, I agree. The most challenging, but also the most interesting.
Yeah. And you develop yourself.
I'm going to move on. Oh, sorry, Conrad. Well, because then I'm just aware we've got 5 minutes left and we still have quite a lot to cover. So I just wanted to, and Conrad, do feel free to roll that into the next part of your answer, whatever you're about to say. But just from your presentation, and we covered it, I think, throughout this this whole morning. However, just if we could sort of concisely talk about how we as suppliers can support clients to create brave and creative approaches in our work, and also how they can then support us to execute those, because the truth is that this does take longer, it does cost more, and you do have to take risks, and the appetite for risk has to be there in order to do that. So we'd just love to hear thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I challenge that it does cost more because it doesn't, because it delivers results. Being open-minded like that delivers results in a way that not being so open-minded doesn't. And so if let's say this project costed X £1,000s more than a project done another way, but actually delivered results, that's an investment, right? It's not thinking in terms of cost, but thinking in terms of investment, I think is an interesting way to look at it. The job of the agency is to give the client confidence that this will work, and to be able to demonstrate that this will work, that it's not as much of a risk as it first seems. I'm not going to name the agency, but we actually got given this brief to tidy up. It started with us being given a load of analysis to do based on another agency's work because the client wasn't happy with the analysis, and it became from our approach sort of came from basically looking at what they'd done and said it was too restrictive. So yeah, that's not me singing our praises. It's more about just having a sort of counterpoint to you know in the end they spent twice to fix a problem rather than spending more the first time.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, potentially we might see things and imagine they're costing more, but actually it's about the investment and the return on investment that you get from doing things properly.
Yeah, can I just roll my answer into the last one?
Yes.
quite often our research is, quite often the briefs that we're given and research for good business reason, right, are very tactical, trying to solve a specific problem. What's the business impact, you know, but sometimes these projects are really exploratory, the ones that we're talking about, and open. And it might be that you need to do one of these exploratory projects to know that, you know, sort of hardwiring diversity into everything you do as a client isn't necessary at all, because all the different diverse audiences behave exactly the same as the mainstream, right? In your category or with regard to your brand. Right. Obviously, the project that I showcased, it's a totally different kettle of fish where it's highly specific, but it isn't always the case. And maybe you should do a piece of work to find out whether you need to worry about this or not.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I think that goes back to the we don't know what we don't know. And so we need a premise to start on. And frankly, we haven't done enough of that yet to be able to make those decisions. So, OK, we have 2 minutes left. So really quickly, I'm going to summarize the movement on the Zoom poll. And I'm pleased to say there has been movement. So well done to all the speakers. So empowered is now at 31%, up from 15. So huge shift there. Confident, 46%, up from 38%, and nervous is now 23%, down from 48%. Nobody, I'm pleased to report, feels worse as a result of this session. So yay, well done. And 49% feel 14% feel much better, 49% better. So good work, everybody. And I will hand back over to Tom just to wrap up for us.